So, what was the Compromise of 1850? The Compromise was first introduced by Senator Henry Clay on January 29, 1850. The Compromise of 1850 was an attempt to smooth out the confrontation between the slave states of the South and the free states of the North regarding the status of the new territories acquired during the Mexican-American War. As seen in this picture, Henry Clay introduces the Compromise of 1850 in the Senate. Many opposed this compromise, but many also supported it. Henry Clay of Kentucky first proposed a series of resolutions in 1850, January 29th. Daniel Webster of Massachusetts also supported this omnibus bill and backed Clay in his speech. However, John C. Calhoun of South Carolina attacked this new plan and demanded that the North stop its attempt to limit slavery. President Zachary Taylor also opposed the compromise, but his death resulted in Millard Fillmore as the new president. When the original bill was rejected by the Senate, Senator Stephen A. Douglas split the omnibus bill into 5 different proposals, and they all passed, and Fillmore signed all of them.
The Compromise of 1850 affected the Utah and New Mexico territories as it allowed slavery by popular sovereignty. It affected California as it admitted it as the 31st state and free state. The Compromise of 1850 also changed Texas's boundaries to what they are today.
There were many social, economic, and political factors that led up to the Compromise of 1850. For social, there were already many tensions between the North and the South before the Compromise of 1850, mainly about whether or not slavery should or shouldn't exist. For political, Texas was annexed, and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed, giving the U.S. the Mexican cession. And lastly, for economic, the Mexican-American War ended, giving the U.S. land from the Mexican cession. That consisted of present-day California, Nevada, Utah, as well as portions of Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Wyoming. The first bill of the Compromise of 1850 consisted of Texas ceding its land to New Mexico and in return gaining $10 million. A social aspect of this was that the boundaries of present-day Texas was set to solve the issues of Texas not being able to control their land because it was dominated by hostile native tribes. An economic aspect of this was because Texas also ceded their land to what is now New Mexico and portions of Colorado, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Wyoming, which brings us to the political aspect, because the federal government gave Texas $10 million in exchange because of their old war debt. The second bill of the Compromise of 1850 consisted of admitting California to the Union as a free state. A social aspect of this was that the North was happy that California became a free state, but the South, however, didn't like that because they couldn't expand slavery into California. A political aspect of this was that it was enforced by the government, and so slavery wasn't allowed in California. Lastly, the economic factor of this was that California was never involved with slavery, and the people of California still farmed without using slaves, and their crops were fairly successful because there was good soil and a long growing season.
The third bill pertained to the Utah Territory and the New Mexico Territory. It said that the option of slavery in these territories was up to popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty, in this context, means in short that the people in those territories decide if slavery is legal or not the government. In a social context, it gave the public more power over the condition and spread of slavery. This didn't necessarily help ease tensions because the people had more control and more freedom to voice their opinions and act on them. In a political context, it overruled the Missouri Compromise and the Wilmot Proviso, even though the Wilmot Proviso was never actually ratified. Also, as discussed before, it gave away some of the government's power to control actions of the people. In economic context, it attracted Southern slaveholders to the territories, and they brought business and money with them, which could have improved economic conditions in the Utah and New Mexico territories.
The fourth bill of the Compromise of 1850 included a bill that said slave trade was prohibited in Washington, D.C., but slaveholding was permitted. This bill prevented the importation of enslaved people into the district for resale or transportation elsewhere, but continued to allow the sale of enslaved district residents to slaveholders, which meant slave owners from other areas did not gain as much money as before. Slavery was gradually fading away in the nation's capital. In fact, by 1860, the District of Columbia was home to around 11,100 free blacks and 3,200 slaves only. This gradual disappearance of slaves helped the abolitionists gain momentum because of the nation's capital's role as the center of abolitionism. Blacks also began to build communities which gave black district residents a sense of ownership and control over part of their lives, and provided opportunities for organized resistance to slavery. Beginning in the early 1850s, anti-slavery congressmen pushed for Congress to use its constitutional power to exercise exclusive legislation to end slavery in the district.
The fifth bill in the Compromise of 1850 was the Fugitive Slave Act. The political aspects of the act was that the government had to enforce the law and capture the runaway slaves from the South. And the economic aspect was the fact that the government paid people to catch these runaways. They sometimes captured blacks from the North and claimed them to be escapees for the compensation, which caused even more social tensions between the two regions. Northerners who helped the slaves were also punished with time in prison and a fine. The Compromise of 1850 built tensions for the Civil War. The Compromise, instead of soothing the social differences between the South and the North that had built up because of the Mexican Cession, caused more issues. They allowed popular sovereignty in the territories, which resulted in further division and violence for the dispute on whether the states should be slaveholding or free. It also led to Bleeding Kansas, the event that occurred when the Kansas-Nebraska Act ignored the Compromise of 1820, and the Fugitive Slave Act caused even more tensions. The Compromise of 1850 did not stop the Civil War from occurring, only postponing it by several years.